So I started weightlifting around the age of 19 or 20, and I was squatting 350 pounds for reps, like 10 reps, a lot of reps, and only to parallel because back in the late 90s, that's what they suggested for squats. And my max bench was 205 pounds at the time. So these were numbers that absolutely would have been competitive in powerlifting, but I never competed, not once. And this was actually because I didn't know how to deadlift. And actually, I was too scared to try it. For some reason, I know it sounds ridiculous, but in my mind, I had something saying that I don't want to get hurt, I don't want to deadlift, yet I would squat 350 pounds. So that absolutely didn't make any sense. So that one fear kept me away from the platform for basically 25 years. But, granted, it was pretty preoccupied with grad school, having my son, working full time. So, of course, um, when you're building your career in your 20s and 30s, that's pretty much what happens to I would say the majority of us. So at 45 years old, after barely working out at all for 15 years, I decided that I was going to accomplish all these things that I told myself in my 20s, oh, I'll do that someday, I'll do that someday, because you think in your 20s you have all the time in the world. Um, so I decided I was going to compete in powerlifting at 45, even though I hadn't been working out at all. I found my coach. His name is Justin Anderson. I told him all of this history, and he said basically, let's go, let's do it. And so I learned to deadlift properly because of him, and I was able to compete for the first time at 46. So in this video, I want to give you everything I wish someone had told me about starting powerlifting, building a routine, finding a coach, walking into your first competition without some of the surprises that caught me off guard. Of course, I was lucky enough to have my coach, Justin, walk me through a lot of this. But if you're starting from scratch or you're coming back from years away, especially as an older lifter, this is probably a video that would have been useful for me when I first started when I was 45. So the main reason why people don't compete, right, is because of fear. So I think this is more common than most people want to admit. At 20, I had real powerlifting numbers, but I told myself I wasn't ready because I did not deadlift. What I didn't understand is that nobody starts powerlifting already knowing how to do everything perfectly, or for anything else for that matter, right? The whole point of training and having a coach is to learn. So I spent 25 years being strong enough to compete and never competing because I was waiting to feel like I was ready. And the honest truth is that I don't think with anything that feeling ever really comes. You just decide to start and you decide to do something and then you work at it. So when I came back at 45, I had a different problem. I had not worked out seriously in 15 years. So I was starting over in my mid 40s with a body that was a long way from where it had been in my 20s, obviously. Basically, the typical middle-aged mom body, right? Um, and now this is compounded by the reality of being an older athlete. And I knew I couldn't afford to get injured the way a 20-year-old could and just be able to shrug it off like somebody in my 20s. So that decision to hire a coach was to teach me deadlifting was really important before I touched the heavy bar. This was one of the best decisions I've made so far in my lifting journey. Um, and this is my first and most important recommendation for anyone starting out. Hopefully, if you can afford it or have the time to make sure that, you work on these lifts properly. So I recommend that you try not to figure out the deadlift alone, especially if you're an older athlete. At least have somebody in your gym, help you walk you through the technique. Um, because the form is technical enough that a small error compounds greatly under heavy loads. But I recommend that if you're new to it, just start as light as you possibly can. I would start with the 45-pound bar with maybe a 10 on each side, and that's exactly how I started, actually. So if you decide you do want to find a powerlifting coach, there are many online. That actually surprised me because I did not know online coaching was a real thing before I found my coach. This works really well for especially an older adult, because they program your training, you film your lifts, you're able to send the videos at any time to them, and then they give you feedback on your form and any adjustments that you need to make. So you get expert eyes on your lifting without needing to be in the same gym. So for someone starting powerlifting, especially at an older age or coming back after a long break, online coaching is actually ideal. So this is what I would look for in a powerlifting coach. So I would, one, make sure they have experience with older athletes or injury modified training. A coach that only works with younger competitive powerlifters may not understand the recovery differences and mobility limitations or the injury history that might come with a lot of us with older bodies. So ask about their experience with athletes over 40. You also want a programming philosophy based on progressive overload with proper periodization. My coach programs in 4 to 5 week blocks with progressive overload, meaning the weights increase systematically over the block. And then it's followed by a deload week where the weights are reduced to allow recovery. When I was newer to lifting, the deloads were full weeks off, but now they're just like lighter weeks. So this progression matters for long-term development without burning out or getting injured. You also want a coach that actually communicates. So you'll send videos, you'll have questions. You need a coach who responds and explains the reasoning behind the programming decisions. You also want somebody, of course, with patience because a good coach understands that powerlifting development, especially for someone older, is a multi-year process. So be suspicious of any coach that promises you rapid results or pushes you to increase the weight faster than your body's ready for. So let me walk you through how my training is structured because I think this is a useful model for anyone starting out. I have trained pretty much 4 days a week since I restarted lifting. My coach is currently programming 3 day weeks since I broke my arm. I went back with him about 2 months ago. The first 3 to 4 months I was working out on my own and rebuilding the arm on my own because I wanted to make, I didn't, he wouldn't know how my arm feels basically. But since then, he's been giving me my workouts again, and it's been 3 days a week right now. So for a beginner just starting powerlifting or weightlifting in general, I would suggest actually 3 days a week as a starting point. Your body needs a lot of recovery time when you're learning a new movement pattern and building foundational strength. So adding a fourth day can always come later once you've adapted to the demands of the lifts and you've made it kind of a habit of lifting because when you're first starting, that's really the biggest struggle is starting a new habit. So each training day usually is work on one or more of the big three lifts, because if you're training specifically for powerlifting, that's what you do. It's usually focused around the squat, the bench, or the deadlift. And then there's also some accessory work. And that accessory work changes with every training block, depending on what weaknesses need to be addressed or what muscle groups need additional development. So the programming does follow a block periodization model. Each 4 to 5 week block has a specific goal, building volume or building intensity, peaking for a competition, or it could be a recovery block. The weights will increase progressively throughout the block, and then it resets slightly at the start of the new block, usually at a higher baseline than where the previous block started. So this is actually how you get stronger over time without burning out, not by lifting as heavy as possible every single session, especially as an older adult. One of the most important things to control is your fatigue level. So by following a planned progression that accumulates load systematically over weeks and months. So one thing I wish I had prioritized more at the beginning actually was mobility and stretching. I didn't see that as being an issue at first, like the first year, I would say. When you come back to lifting after 15 years of a desk job, your mobility can be very limited, especially in your hips and your ankles. And I think that contributed to my early struggles with the squat. I'm still actually struggling with my squat. It's my most challenging lift. My squat form, getting the depth was tough for a long time because my body, I think, was having a hard time getting into position it needed. So if I was starting over, I would add at least 10 minutes of targeted mobility work before training sessions from day one. Hip flexors, ankles, thoracic spine, the areas that the desk work actually compresses over the years and makes these muscles kind of weak. To me, it's definitely not the most fun part of a workout, but it's the work that makes these lifts feel natural rather than forced and easier. So I think, I mean, I'm still trying to get myself to do this. Believe me, adding some cardio alongside lifting. So powerlifting is definitely not a cardio sport, but you do need enough to support recovery and general conditioning. A 20 to 30-minute walk or bike ride, at least on rest days. And believe me, I'm still trying to get myself to do this, makes a difference on how your body feels and recovers between sessions. If you're probably wondering what equipment you need when you're starting out, if you want to seriously start lifting, there's a lot of marketing noise in the powerlifting space, and beginners can spend money on a lot of things they don't really need. So in my opinion, you really don't need anything in particular when you're first starting. The biggest thing is shoes. Just make sure that there's not too much cushion and there's not too much angle, especially for squats. And the other thing is a weightlifting belt. You could do all these lifts without a belt, but the belt does support your core and it allows you to brace more effectively under heavy loads. But of course, if you're starting out and you're doing light loads, there's no reason to sweat the belt yet. That's probably the most impactful piece of equipment. That's the one I would recommend investing in first. And everything else can wait until your weights are high enough to justify it, or you're going to get ready to compete, because the equipment can vary by powerlifting federation. So you just want to make sure that whatever you get complies with that federation. So the other piece of equipment that powerlifters use at the competitions are knee sleeves. So I would say, in addition to the belt, that would be the next best investment. They provide some compression to the knee joint, which becomes more relevant as your squat gets heavier. Um, and most federations actually require that equipment, so you'll need to get them eventually anyway. Lifting shoes, especially shoes with a raised heel, can help with squat depth. I got these when I was newly working out, and truthfully, for me, I hated them. I squat in barefoot shoes, and they feel the most comfortable for me. But if your ankle has a mobility limitation, these shoes might be worth considering earlier, when you're newer at lifting. Otherwise, they can wait. A lot of powerlifters I see use wrist wraps. I never actually use them. So for bench press, deadlift bar, there's also chalk that you could use to make your hands less sweaty and hold a better grip on the bar. So these all have their place with powerlifting, but none of them are necessities from the beginning. So just start simple, a belt and shoes that you already own probably. Um, Add equipment as your lifts progress and you get closer to competing. So let's talk about competing, because this is where most beginners have questions and the most anxiety. And believe me, I'm still new at this sport too, so I still have anxiety, and I'm sure I'm going to have it, definitely for my next few meets. But signing up for me is simpler than most people expect. Most federations have an online registration through their websites. You just choose your meet, register, pay the entry fee. Sometimes you have to pay the fee also to the Powerlifting Federation, and just select your weight class. If you have a coach, he or she will help guide you through the process. If you're self-coached, the Federation websites have all the information you need, but it's really useful if you know somebody that's competed before that could help you be a handler. I had a friend that did this for me on my first competition. I really loved having her support there. So the federation you choose matters because it determines the rules, the equipment requirements, and the drug testing protocols. So the most common federations for natural lifters are USAPL, USPA, and RPS, and there's some others. So do some research on which federation has meets near you and whether the rules align with how you train. So I'll tell you some things that surprised me about meet day because nobody had told me some of these things. It was just something I guess I had to experience. Um, but my first competition, it started much earlier than I expected. I think I was there by 6:30 in the morning, and weighing could be several hours before lifting begins. So depending on your federation and weight class, you might be weighing in at 7 a.m. or earlier. So plan accordingly. Set multiple alarms, know exactly where your venue is, and give yourself more time than you think you'll need to get there and to get situated. So another thing that I was surprised at was how long the day was. A powerlifting meet's not a 2-hour event. Depending on the number of lifters and how the session is organized, you could be there for 6, 8, 10, even 12 hours or longer. So one thing I didn't do for my first competition is bring food. You need snacks. You need more food than you think you need. Actually, it might be smart to even, I've seen them bring coolers. So I didn't know how long these lifts would take, and I was not actually prepared, especially my first meet at the gap between lifts. So also your warm-ups have to be timed properly. So they usually have your name on a screen and what order you're going to be lifting in. So you have to know maybe 45 minutes ahead of time. It depends that you have to start warming up. So that way when it's your time to get called up, that you could do your lift properly. So you don't want to warm up too early, right? Because you'll be completely cold and you don't want to obviously lift so late that you miss your name getting called. So you want to be ready to lift the best that you can when your name is called and not fatigued also from warming up. So most experienced competitors work backward from their opening attempt timing to plan to start when warming up. So don't warm up too much and don't lift too heavy during your warm-ups because it's tempting to keep taking warm-up attempts because it feels like preparation, but um, every warm-up can cost you actually. It could uh, basically drain your energy. So your opening attempt on the platform should feel moderately challenging, definitely not near your maximum effort. So you have your 3 attempts, and your opener should actually be conservative. So especially for your first meet, open with a weight that you feel completely confident that you can lift on any day, regardless of how nervous you are or how much sleep you got. Um, the goal of your first meet is to go in to make all those attempts on all 3 lifts. So the experience of the meet is more valuable than the number on the board. And let me tell you, I did not get all my lifts on my first meet. I kept failing them due to various, not necessarily failing the lift itself, but to this not paying attention to the signals and things of that nature. So that's pretty common on your first meet, but the goal is to not lift so heavy that you're nervous about that and not paying attention to the other things. So one thing I've noticed at the couple meets I've done so far is that the powerlifting community will surprise you. They're very humble and friendly, and it's a very supportive environment. People will cheer for every lifter. Experienced competitors help beginners. So the atmosphere is very collaborative rather than competitive in a way that maybe happens in other sports. Every person that lifts understands how much work it took to be able to get to this point where you're competing. So I spent 25 years being strong enough to powerlift, never doing it because I was waiting to feel ready. At 45 years old, I stopped waiting and decided to just do it. I found a coach. I learned how to deadlift finally. I competed. And so this was one of the best decisions I've ever made because this training I feel like has opened up other areas of my life as well. So if you're over 40 and thinking about starting or competing for the first time, I want to tell you directly, just the time is now and just do it. Don't do it when you feel ready. Don't do it when your numbers are better because our numbers can always be better. Just start doing it and find a coach if you can. learn the movements properly, build a routine with progressive overload, and then make sure you properly recover. That's one thing that I think most of us do when we're young is we don't consider recovery as part of our training. So anyone could compete in powerlifting if they want to. So if you want to follow my journey back to my pre-injury numbers, which was 310 deadlift, 170 bench, 225 squat before I broke my arm. I post every week. I show everything, the progress. I try to show the setbacks when I catch them. My name is Dr. Colleen Spiegel, and I'll see you in the next video.